Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. You saw the title. Let's go. Okay, so I went to a museum reopening at the MOMU in Antwerp titled Mirror, Mirror, Fashion and the Psyche. It's all about how fashion, self-image, identity, and psychology are interlinked. We're getting to it. Hang tight. We're getting to it. The remarkable thing about these topics is that every single person has had thoughts about themselves and their identity when they're getting dressed. It's like one of the basic things about fashion. This exhibit and this kind of study more broadly is meant to speak to every single person, regardless of whether or not they're into designer clothing like you and I are. So beyond looking at the clothes themselves, which we are absolutely going to do because I got some stellar footage of this stuff, we're also going to dive deeper into fashion as an art form so we can kind of unpack the curatorial decisions of the museum's director and of the museum's chief curator. The Mirror Mirror exhibit places a lot of emphasis on how humans perceive their body, and it's divided up into three main parts: reflection, replica, and avatar. When we walk into the exhibit, we first see a piece of artwork by Antwerp Six legend Dirk van Sand. It's not fashion, but rather artwork in the medium of a sculpture or stool or really cool object. It's titled "I Feel Perfectly Terrible." This piece depicts a wholly relatable self-image struggle that dresses an object rather than a person in clothes. Like you can see that the stool legs are wearing the pants. That brings us into our first segment, which is called reflection. The way that we present ourselves, we are seen by other people, but we are also seen by ourselves. And so this section is sort of asking if fashion is able to help with that problem, or at least how fashion looks at that problem. The clothing in this section is from a lot of brands that we all know and love, but they all had one thing in common: volume and unexpected proportions. At its core, the reflection segment is a comment on how silhouette can influence perception by others or even of yourself to yourself. In really, really big silhouettes, you can't see your own body, and others can't see your body either. So like with the recent rise of oversized clothing being adopted so heavily in trends, and then also just among like cool people who don't care about trends, they also play the role of clouding perception. This theme makes a lot of sense for a contemporary understanding of how our bodies interact with the clothes that we wear. It's possible that I'm reading a little bit too much into this. I want to hear what everybody thinks about this, but for me, the reason I've been so drawn to oversized clothing in the last couple of years is that it feels like it takes me as a person through my clothes and kind of turns all of that into an event. Like, you know the phrase, "you're not wearing the clothes are wearing you," that's always used in a really negative way. It's like that, but in a positive way. Like the vision of the designer is getting to come out fully through my body. I personally really identify and like that. We're going to do a quick rundown of all of the pieces that tied into this theme of reflection. We'll do the best for first. Comme des Garçons Spring 1997 Body Meets Dress, Dress Meets Body collection. Rei Kawakubo's grotesque depiction of domestic women. It is way more complicated than the summary that I just gave you, but for now, we're going to just focus on that element of it. This kind of grotesque depiction of the woman who is like stuck in the housewife role. Walter van Burendonk's collaboration for artist Erwin Wurm saw the use of ruffled tulle molded into shapes that speak to many topics covered in this exhibit. First, Wurm is an artist whose humorous work still comments sharply on our relationship to daily things, but also specifically on the idea of gaining and losing weight. You can see this in his famous work, Fat Car. Here, with the help of the legend, Walter van Burendonk, fashion appears as a puffy, rotund kind of second skin, which is a comment on how we view ourselves when we dress. Molly Goddard's ruffled clothing is as gorgeous as it is effective at communicating its message, which is kind of allowing women to take up space in environments in a very literal way. And I like that also because the idea of taking up extra space in an environment is such an aggressive proposition that usually when designers go for that, they're going for that same aggressive tone to be communicated in the clothes themselves. Like Noor Kanye Namiya is a great example of that. Like those clothes all feel very aggressive when they take up a lot of space. But with Molly Goddard, it's still like this embracing of like your childhood girly self. It's all very fanciful and beautiful and adjectives, you get my point. And one thing to remember about this is that all the clothing on display fits this theme of ma, which is a Japanese word that roughly translates to space, like distance. We've talked about this before on the channel, and every time I talk about Ma, I feel like I have to qualify that it is way, way more complicated than just space. But for our purposes here, that's kind of all we can go into. It's just space. In oversized, large clothes, there is no perception about what your body looks like either by yourself or from someone else. The space, or lack of it, between the clothes and you and another person, you and even the room you're in, all of that is the Ma. You can continue to see that in Issey Miyake's lightweight coats that place you in flat middle of an origami object that's not yet completed. If the coat wasn't translucent, you couldn't tell where the wearer's body was inside of it. The fact that it is see-through shows us that he uses Ma in this piece, and the Ma is on display both for the wearer who is experiencing the Ma in a touch sensation kind of way, and then also to others who are looking at it because they can see that empty space between the garment and the body. Ma can even be extended out to hair, how it takes up space and creates the silhouette of a full look, even on a mannequin. More on mannequins in a bit. Cyndia Harvey, who's an Afro hairstylist and specialist, created custom wigs for the mannequins in this collection to highlight the creativity and beauty in black hair and its ability to take on so many different styles. She's worked with FKA Twigs, Frank Ocean, Kendrick Lamar, all to demonstrate the beauty of silhouette in black hair. Let's move on to the second big theme here, replica. I couldn't find a meme for this one. We have a lot to unpack here. We're going to start this with a little bit of a story. Last time I visited the MOMU, I got to interview the museum director, Kat Debeau, on a previous exhibit, which was titled Emotion, and we'll link the video to that down in the description. We got into a conversation about mannequins, and Kat's words are really helpful here. We're going to just listen to her.
It is problematic. The use of mannequins in fashion exhibitions is very, very problematic, and it's of course you can write a caption in a wall text contextualizing why you use certain mannequins, why you have these standardized bodies, or you can find ways or try to experiment with ways of displaying fashion where you maybe have actual bodies.
And now we get to see how the MOMU is tackling this discussion. Dolls are how designers replicate the human experience of wearing clothes without the need of a human. These replicas say something about what we deem humans to be, an uncanny representation of them. Like, it's kind of the uncanny valley of the human body. So like mannequins are these full-sized replicas of human bodies that are meant to kind of stand in the place of a person wearing clothes, but then you could even shrink that all the way down to dolls, which are, I mean, for anybody who's into fashion process, dolls are a huge part of that, and almost just about every designer has had some experience in their life dressing or playing with or creating clothes for dolls. Martin Margiela's childhood dolls with handmade clothes and vinegar-dyed wigs were on display, and kind of a funny anecdote here. We were told that Martin Margiela actually showed up to drop the dolls off himself for the museum exhibit, and I imagine that conversation went something like this. Hi everyone. Hi Martin Margiela. What can we do for you today? Oh, nothing. I just wanted to drop off some of my dolls for your exhibit. Thank you, Martin Margiela. Have a good day. You too. That interaction must have been so crazy. I can't even imagine. Wild. Outside of these dolls serving as the first ever Margiela models, you can see many ideas that he would later turn into literal clothes, like the visible darts and the cigarette shoulder. You can even kind of see that poking out here. But more than that, he literally took dolls' clothing and created it proportionally large for humans. Like giant zippers, loose threads, the strange proportions of doll clothes that are there because those clothes are so tiny. Those same proportions ended up getting scaled up to be wearable for an actual person. But Margiela's habit of playing with dolls as a child wasn't always the norm throughout history. So like in the 17th century, for example, it was wealthy adult women who were most commonly playing with dolls. And on display, they had one piece that was a miniaturized version of a dress that Marie Antoinette wore, which was sort of what made dolls fun for those women. They served as a vehicle to talk about fashions of the time. And in that way, dolls were the first ever influencers, kind of, because they would be sent around Europe to show the new styles. These dolls were so important, in fact, to the French, particularly to their economic activity related to fashion, that when there was a shipping embargo around Europe during World War II, dolls were still allowed to be sent all over Europe. You may have heard of the Théâtre de la Mode, a way to allow French designers to showcase their collections in 1945 for the spring-summer 1946 in the wake of war, austerity, and the rationed access to fabrics. Every major house designed an outfit for a single doll, including the House of Worth, Lanvin, and Anna de Pombo. We got to see them here, too. Other discussions around dolls included Walter van Beirendonck, who had this thing crawling from the ceiling at us, but also showcased his first pandemic collection by filming dolls very, very close up. I actually love this collection. This is one of my favorite Walter van Beirendonck collections ever. It's the best. Another cool example is one of my new favorite designers, Simone Rocha, who's inspired greatly by the clothes of her dolls that she had when she was growing up in Ireland. And it's pretty cool because obviously there's a lot of designers who make very different stuff as product from the stuff that they get inspired by and that goes onto the runway. A lot of Simone Rocha's stuff that goes out into stores reflects this inspiration in a really high fidelity way. It's really good stuff. Michelle Elie, noteworthy CDG collector and one of the most fashionable women currently living, was made into a doll, particularly to highlight the disparity in life-size mannequins and how they often exclude black women from conversations about the standard. I don't know, I'm not trying to overplug this or anything, but Michelle Elie is one of really incredibly well-dressed. You should follow her, she's incredible. One of my favorite pieces was this mannequin, which critiques the Nazi Party's perception of the ideal woman as being fertile, healthy, and strong. Apparently the father of Hans Bellmer, the artist who made this piece that's called The Half Doll, was a Nazi sympathizer himself. So the artist wasn't, his dad was, which is part of what inspired him to make this. They also had the legendary Victor and Rolf Russian doll collection, which shows us different layers of clothing being shed. And I'm just going to fill this space with a little bit more talking so I can show you how legendary this collection actually is. I actually had not seen this before I went to this MOMU exhibit, and I was like, I have to check this out tonight. And I did, and it's so fucking cool. This was kind of a blink and you miss it piece by Genesis Bellinger. It's one of many where she discusses the, quote, capitalist and manipulative tendency to fragment and fracture the female body in advertising. So we recognize that women in that way, by parts of them, often used to highlight the fact that we don't often view women as beautiful in their entirety, but rather as individual parts that we desire made up into a whole. And this piece in particular was custom made for this MOMU exhibit. Final section, Avatar. Without the real-life perceptions of your real-life body, physical eyes looking at your physical self, and without the surrogate of the mannequins to help mitigate that idea of the human body, digital avatars have become this new way of expressing ourselves in digital worlds. It is a new way of being perceived. Some examples of this were the many digital people, influencers. I don't know, man. Little Michaela has brand deals and stuff now. This has gotten very confusing. It's not a real life person, in it. Not in it. It should be in she. Then we saw Botter's digital dress-up character game, which was really special. Ending with work by Ed Adkins' 3-channel HD video installation called Ribbons that comments on the contradictions of being unique in being human, yet completely similar, and how the digital condition has bred this dilemma. There was one other thing. Okay, this is really crucial. I don't know if it ties in super well to the rest of the themes here, but there was a totally separate exhibit at the MOMU that I just have to show you because it was incredible. This is Exploding Fashion. The exhibit was called Exploding Fashion. It's by Caroline Evans and Alistair O'Neill. We've spoken about Professor Evans extensively on this channel. She wrote the seminal fashion theory book, Fashion at the Edge, and she is also the god. Yes, she is. So Evans and O'Neill chose 5 historical garments from Comme des Garçons, Halston, Madeleine Vianney, Cristobal Balenciaga, and Charles James. They spent time with those pieces with a curator in a museum. Then they had the curators that handle those historic artifacts measure out pieces with the instruction of pattern experts who themselves were not allowed to touch the original garments. They then had to go through the exhaustive process of recreating those pattern pieces in order to recreate the garments themselves. They told us that the Halston one, which honestly was the one that seemed the simplest design dress out of all 5, was actually the hardest to understand from a pattern perspective because the bolt of fabric that garment used was far, far wider than a standard bolt. And they told us that, in fact, there were no mills that they could find that would make them these double wide bolts of fabric. And that Halston was, at the time that he made that dress, currently enjoying a lot of financial success and was able to pay for a custom bolt of fabric. But making a bolt of fabric that is twice as wide as a normal bolt, that is unheard of. Most machines literally can't do it. So they had to compromise a little bit and figure out another solution to recreating the garment because there were no mills that would do the same thing that they did for Halston. To balance out the extremeness of the process to make this and the extreme expense of making it, this dress was inspired by a pareo, which is just a swimsuit wrap. Other problems that emerged at this point in the process was a struggle to find similar fabrics. Like, for example, the Comme des Garçons piece, incredibly impressive. Look at this long boy pattern. She is long. This was made with a cotton jersey that didn't have any stretch in it, which allows it to hold its drapey shape for longer. And I don't know about you, I've never even heard of a cotton jersey that doesn't have stretch in it. Like, everyone has cotton jersey in their closet and it's all stretchy. I thought that was a natural part of what jersey was. So these clothes were all patterned and then sewn together, and then they found models who could walk in the style of how models who presented these clothes would have walked at the time. And then they strapped motion capture stuff to them and made them walk around in the clothes. And then they used the motion capture to animate the clothes and the people walking in them so you could see and kind of study from all angles what they would have been about when they were worn. I mean, this project was so exhaustive. This looked like the most fun thing of all time. I loved going to it. This was fascinating getting to learn about this. Hey everyone, go join my Patreon, please. It's the only way this channel is able to run. YouTube doesn't make a lot of money for anybody, really. Like, unless you're PewDiePie, you're not crushing it on YouTube. Please support the Patreon so that independent fashion journalism and criticism can continue to exist. Thank you. I love you. I'll see you next Monday. Goodbye. Thanks.